Mr. Secretary, the unleashing of energy power, what is that? What does that look like from the Interior Department?
Well, both from Interior, but also I have an opportunity to wear two hats in this administration also as the chairman of the National Energy Dominance Council that President Trump created by executive order, which contains most of the members of the cabinet, Vice Chair Chris Wright, and I would say what it looks like is the unleashing is exactly that. I mean, it's cutting through all the red tape. We've just come off of 4 years where the Biden administration had a whole of government attack on U.S. energy, and we're trying to turn that ship 180 degrees in the other direction and be wind at the back of U.S. energy as opposed to a gale force wind in their face.
What are you able to do? What is your red tape that you can now cut? What can the Department of Interior do to that?
Well, again, going back to the National Energy Dominance Council, part of what President Trump fully understands is with this whole of government attack that the Biden administration had on energy, there was SEC rules, there was Army Corps of Engineers, there was the weaponizing of certain laws like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife's Endangered Species Act. I mean, all of these things coming from different angles, and so we've got all the cabinet leaders that are on this council to help us unleash it. And if we're going to put sanctions on an adversary like Iran, we've got the State Department, the Treasury Department, they're on there, they'll make sure those are enforced. We've got Brooke Rollins from USDA because biofuels plays a point in this, and of course Chris Wright, our fabulous new Secretary of Energy, and all of the things that are going there. But and this is not just liquid fuels, this is also electricity, and part of the reason why President Trump declared a national energy emergency on day one is because the decisions to tilt so in favor of unreliable, expensive, intermittent sources for electricity has put our grid at risk at a time when we need to have more electricity to be able to win the AI arms race against China.
Lots to unpack there. So let's go where you took it, which is alternative energy, and one of that is offshore wind. You've been reviewing offshore wind in terms of the existing leases that have already been doled out. Are you any closer to deciding if those companies and those projects get to keep the leases?
They're all under review, and including onshore wind is also under review, not just offshore, but we're starting with the offshore wind because, of course, that's sometimes 3 times as expensive, and part of what our goal here for Americans is to have lower cost, affordable, reliable energy.
Right, but if the company already has, say, power purchase agreements and they already have their contracts lined up and their permitting lined up, why would you take that away?
Well, I think again, that's part of the review. We've been instructed by an EO to take a look at all of that, but in some cases, if we've gone so far out of balance in certain of these RTOs, or regional transmission organizations, where we've got too much renewable and not enough baseload that's part of what's putting the grid at risk, and we've got to make sure that we've got the right balance.
Okay, so when do you think the review will be completed?
We've got a open end on this thing. We're going to make sure we do a thorough job on reviewing those projects that are underway.
When we switch then to other forms, a big part of this is going to be obviously permitting and being able to move the energy, whether or not it's a liquid form, whether or not it's just power. If I'm a company and I'm looking at what the administration is trying to do, what's the confidence level that all of this permitting, legal issues, putting pipes in the ground can be done in 4 years?
Well, it has to be done sooner than that.
Usually it's like 20 sometimes for a pipeline.
Right. Well, those days have to be over, because if you've got a national energy emergency, we've got to figure out a way to actually deliver. In this case, one of the things we got to be able to do is we've got to be able to deliver low-cost, clean U.S. natural gas to all corners of the lower 48. I mean, we've got a situation now where we've got New England states that might be gas prices there might be 4 times higher than Pennsylvania, because we can't complete a 124-mile pipeline across the state of New York. So again, if you're in a national energy emergency, at the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we were offloading 400,000 barrels of oil a day of dirty Russian heating oil into New England. I mean, 80% of the people in the state of Maine and 40% of the people in New Hampshire are still heating their homes with heating oil. We can do better than that for these citizens. They ought to have the same right, the same access to LNG that someone does in North Dakota, Pennsylvania, or Texas. So,
well, yes. And when I talk to any, though, company, whether it's a pipeline company, an oil company, a gas company, everyone feels uncertain. Like they don't know where tariffs are going to land. They don't have clarity on certain policies. They don't have clarity from all the departments, so they don't want to make a decision yet. How can you give them that clarity?
Well, tariffs is a separate bucket, but part of what we're talking about on building linear infrastructure in this country is really a regulatory.
Is it separate, though? Because if I'm going to build a pipeline, I got to get the steel and aluminum, and that's more expensive.
Well, yes, but we should also understand the core principles of tariffs of President Trump. He's been very, very consistent, which is if a country has got a high barrier in their country for the importing into their country of U.S. goods, he wants to have reciprocity. And so people can take a look. The United States is not going to be needlessly or without cause putting tariffs on stuff coming to our country unless that other country has also got a closed market.
Right.
And also the other thing that President Trump has said he's been looking at is he's looking at the trade balances, and one of the ways that a country can level their trade balance with the U.S. Is to buy more U.S. energy. And the way we buy more U.S. energy is we build those export terminals. The removing of the Biden export ban or the pause on export facilities for LNG. Chris Wright and I were in Louisiana last Thursday. 6,000 American workers in hard hats that wouldn't be working today on an $18 billion expansion if that permit and that ban had not been reversed. And so we're providing all kinds of certainty in this market to people to know that this is a pro-business, pro-energy, pro-USA administration, and that we need all forms of energy to help us drive forward.
Yeah, you're speaking of Venture Global and the expansion there in the Gulf Coast. Speaking of, though, in terms of oil and gas leases, for example, if workers who actually approve leases are being let go, or if Elon Musk is targeting them for DOGE, does that make your job harder to get those leases done?
Well, first of all, it's been clarified by the president that each cabinet secretary is in charge of their downsizing efforts within their agency, and we welcome the support and help of the additional resources of a DOGE team that's digging in and looking really for on the cost side.
So you haven't had to lay off anybody?
We've made a decision, not had to, but we've made a decision. Obviously we've got a right-sized government. It's bad for the interest rate markets, it's bad for the world, it's bad for every American, it's bad for future generations if we think that it's sustainable to spend $2 trillion more, 2,000 billion a year extra is what we spent last year. So, the vision is we've got to drive revenue up, and we've got to drive, additional $1 trillion of revenue, additional $1 trillion in cost savings is the path to a balanced budget. Well, the Interior Department, we've got the biggest balance sheet in the world, 500 million acres of land, 700 million acres of subsurface, 2 billion acres of offshore acreage. All of that's got revenue possibility, and not just in oil and gas, but timber and grazing leases. And under the Biden administration, the revenue in Interior was on a decline. If Interior was a hedge fund, it would be the largest balance sheet in the world, and we would have the poorest returns of any company in the world. This is a turnaround opportunity for us to drive revenue up. We want to make sure anybody that's involved in getting permits done, they need to stay. People who've been involved in blocking permits, or people who've been participating in illegally not holding the required lease auctions that are required by law, they probably don't need to stay.
Okay, that's good clarity. So let's pivot just before we let you go to, say, coal and nuclear, and steps to be taken to prolong the life of coal plants and nuclear plants, which clearly, if you're above all energy, you're going to need those. Where are we in that right now?
Well, absolutely. We've got two sources of base load that have been neglected and sometimes demonized, and that's coal and nuclear. And if there's a coal plant still running in the U.S., it's among the cleanest in the world. And China last year opened up 100 gigawatts of new coal. India on a similar track. They understand that we've got billions of people that don't even yet have electricity, and China in particular understands they need base load to be able to win the AI arms race. They're also got 30 nuclear plants under construction, and they're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on hydro. So in the U.S., we've fallen behind on energy production. Now we've got real demand from people that are willing to pay for it, and that's and that's the hyperscalers. The 5 big tech companies have a $300 billion CapEx budget. This is the largest, their CapEx budget is bigger than oil and gas, bigger than automotive, bigger than steel, bigger than any other industry, and what they want to spend it on is they need electricity to drive that, because this is not, an AI data center is not like, oh, we're going to process healthcare claims. I mean, that's important work, it's just business back office processing. In an AI data center, you're actually manufacturing intelligence. And that intelligence now becomes the highest value product we've ever created with electricity since electricity was invented. So the demand for that is going to be real. We've gone through decades of almost no demand increase. The entire time that I was in tech, we used 1% of the nation's electricity, even as the tech sector was growing, because everything was becoming more efficient. Now we're in a spot where we've got real demand growth. We've got to meet that demand growth, and we've got to meet it with reliable, affordable baseload.
And that's not even the inference part of it, which is going to be even more. So what's the mechanism that you guys can use to keep the coal plant open longer, the nuclear site open longer?
Well, we can stop death by regulation, and part of that we can do by taking a close look at the actual legality of some of the rulemaking that was, perpetrated against these industries. And I think as part of under the national energy emergency, which President Trump has declared, we've got to keep every coal plant open, and we've got to, and if there have been units at a coal plant that have been shut down, we need to bring those back on, not just when it's 0 degrees or 20 below. I mean, we've had days, on the day that President Trump was inaugurated, in the entire PJM market, which is 13 states from New York to Virginia, 5 a.m. of January 20th was the highest peak load for the winter. 0 from solar, because it was 5 a.m., it was dark out. 2% from wind, 70% from fossil fuels, 22% from nuclear. So if somebody says, hey, we don't need fossil fuels or nuclear, it was providing over 90% of the power on that particular day for some of our most populous areas. I mean, the only thing would have been running would have been a hospital with a diesel generator if you didn't have base load fossil fuels. We're not in a period of energy transition. That is one of the big lies of the climate extremists, is energy transition. We're in a period of energy addition. We need addition for the billions of people that don't have electricity. We need additions for AI. We need additions in supply to keep the prices down. And if we want to bring manufacturing back to the United States, and reindustrialize our nation and not make the mistakes that Germany and the UK are making right now of deindustrializing. With electric prices in Germany are triple what they are here in the United States. And so we're on a path under President Trump to reindustrialize the U.S., bring manufacturing home, bring investment back, and it's working. Look, $1.7 trillion of capital flowing back to the U.S. in the last 6 weeks, because they know we're committed to a policy of providing abundant, reliable, low-cost energy.
But TBD if that includes solar and onshore and offshore wind.
Well, I think that those are, we know that offshore wind for sure is 3 times as expensive, and it's intermittent. So if you're trying for reliable and affordable, it wouldn't meet either of those criteria.